Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Uncharted Territory podcast. Today we're coming at you fresh from our first crypto cafe session, which we hosted within our Navigating the Financial Reset program. And it was a really fascinating evening where we got to really assess where different people are on their journey and what some of the barriers are to actually embracing crypto blockchain more deeply, both from a practical standpoint, but also from a knowledge and some wider issues that we're going to talk about today. Sam, what are your reflections on what we picked up on yesterday through our session?
Yeah, well, it is always helpful to see where people are at and see more clearly in person what the barriers are. And I like the way you said barriers, because almost it's barriers to entry of going on your journey of learning, rather than think it's barriers to entry to being invested or holding assets or getting involved at that level. What are your barriers even to just getting into the learning and learning more? So we always talk about the sovereign aspect of all these things you learn about is that you can get to a place where you can take better decisions yourself and know how you want to interact with it. So it's really interesting because, often the biggest block is that first block, that hurdle. Once people are over that first hurdle, then things can grow from there. But that first hurdle can be such a block and people not knowing where to start and where to go. And as we saw, on the call, there were people that sort of, mostly relatively new to the topic. Some had been invested already, had some assets, but there was a big leap from people who had absolutely no awareness to the people who just had that baseline grounding awareness. And that's why it's so critical before you kind of embark deep on a journey, maybe invested, just to get that baseline. We could see the shift. Once you've got that, the advance actually is not that great to keep going and move into, more advanced topics and get really creative with it. But yeah, that kind of level where you're not in at all, and almost any word sounds daunting, doesn't it? Now we can see, once you have no kind of visuals in your mind about the ecosystem, then every word's a trigger to what's going on. Yes. But once you kind of, got the ecosystem and understand the absolute basics, like, ways to get your fiat currency into the crypto ecosystem via an exchange, what a wallet is, maybe the basis of Bitcoin. These aren't massive things to understand, but they are the baseline before you try and dive in and explore further. Because if you don't have that sort of foundation, then it's very hard to build anything on top of it.
Yeah, and we had 3 groups of people last night, really. The newbies who are, very new to the subject and just starting to familiarize themselves with the ecosystem and the kind of knowledge terrain. And then you've got the beginners who are at the next stage. They've got some of the basics in place, like the wallets and the exchanges and the fundamentals. And then you've got like the third stage, which are people who have already invested in their first few assets, or maybe a little further along the journey and exploring possibilities. But what was really interesting, Sam, aside from that, those 3 groups is actually what you actually started by saying is actually what are the barriers to learning about this? Because the question becomes, how do we then go from 0 to 1? Because group 1 beginners, newbies rather, they're at least beyond the kind of, they've made a step towards learning about it by, consuming different resources or making a decision to join a program like ours. But there's a lot of people who aren't at that stage yet. They're at stage 0, which is very limited knowledge. You can't really avoid the subject of crypto because it's becoming more and more of a public discourse. But I think there's a lot of barriers as well to even embracing the idea, which I think we should touch upon in today's conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, because there's so many noise and hyperbole, but also confusing narratives and very polarized narratives. And like we often say, when you get really polarized narratives, they can be a barrier to entry because you can have associations with it before you even looked yourself. So I think the sovereign path on anything you learn about is go and find out for yourself. We always talk about that. It's critical, whatever the topic. That's really what we're trying to move towards, is everybody actually finding out for themselves from their own first-hand experience and getting away from this outsourcing, and at the extreme level, outsourcing to the mainstream or, which is probably the most dangerous, but even outsourcing to, even your peer group, even if you trust it, that's still outsourcing at some level. And that's better. But if you can keep improving that and bring it closer and closer in, at the essence, what's the most powerful thing on your journey always is that you have first-hand experience. So you can then decide yourself, and it's not second-hand, and you're not, you're verifying for yourself and seeing what your relationship with it is. And you can come to it, and then you just feel more empowered because you've got the info to filter through your own mechanisms, through your own reflections, and sit with it. And that's what's powerful, but that's what takes the effort. You've got to move towards it. And you have to write down that barrier, for the person who's at kind of level 0 to get beyond that. For a lot of those people, it might just be a word in their mind. It's just crypto. It's literally this intangible thing hanging around. I'm scared of it. And I want to tell a story, actually, because it does sum up the kind of reactions I can get if I mention the word crypto out in public. I was actually preparing for a conference a couple of months ago, and I had to get some printing done. And it was for Crypto Cafe, so went to this local print shop. It's a husband and wife team, and they could see my logo to Crypto Cafe. But instantly the reaction, the wife went to that reaction of, don't talk about crypto, it's all too confusing. That straight sort of visceral reaction. I hadn't even said anything down. She just saw what line of work I was in. And then the husband appeared, and he was really even more interesting because he almost appeared like an Agent Smith from The Matrix, like sort of rose up behind the counter and said to me before I'd said anything, it's all a scam. Everyone's lost all their money. And I was kind of like, overarching sort of energy on top of me. I'd literally just got some printing done. And it was very reminiscent of even the COVID era where somebody's just telling you what the truth is.
Yeah.
I'm in crypto. I'm living crypto. I've got to know a lot of people in crypto. He's telling me that we've all lost all our money. And obviously the narrative was, it was recently after the FTX collapse, which we've talked about in other discussions. So those two reactions are so common, which is, firstly, I'm absolutely scared, it's too complicated, I don't want to go near it. Or, you've taken the mainstream kind of news, being manipulated by that agenda, which is, it's all a scam, everybody's lost all their money, I don't believe you when you say you haven't. I'm trying to say calmly, I haven't, and I'm not going to go to no one I know has. But of course, as you know, when you meet an Agent Smith and Matrix, they're not there to have a dialogue. They're here to tell you, what the Ministry of Information has told them through their newspaper or their TV. So those are often the kind of reactions you get out there, in society, just to crypto. So, that is a real. You can see how big those. Just take those two people. They got two massive barriers. And moving beyond that, you'll discover a whole, as we've always discussed, a whole nother nuanced world, that goes so far beyond those initial reactions. And then, what I'm passionate about is before you make such sweeping judgments, just find out a bit of stuff, and again, if it doesn't interest you at all, don't bother going near it. But if you think you've got a strong opinion, but it's based on no experience yourself, then that's what's really problematic, isn't it? Is these opinions being really strong, but not based on education or awareness. And that's why overarching in this topic, whether it's finance or crypto or anything, I'm really passionate. I know you're passionate, is why we come together, is about education, Dan, so that people can decide themselves what it's about. That's the sovereign aspect of anything on this journey.
Yeah, it reminds me of a story as well from my own life's experience where someone, I won't say who or even give any clue to who it could be, but someone in my inner circle, which could be friends or family, go out for a meal, go out for a restaurant, go to a restaurant, and I might say, oh, have you tried this particular type of food? And they say, oh, I don't like that type of food. Oh, have you ever tried it? No. It's like, how do you know you don't like it? You've never tried it. And what it illustrated for me, and our life path is very different. I've always been very open-minded and guided by curiosity, and want to try things, want to learn things, want to experience things, which, if it's not coupled with the kind of sense of discernment, you can lead into a world of naivety. But the level of openness, I think, determines how willing we are to look at something, whereas the other person is a lot more closed-minded and therefore less willing to take new experiences, whether it's a dish in a restaurant or new way of thinking or a new type of knowledge. And I think there is that element within society that perhaps, whether it's fear or not wanting to move out of their comfort zone because what they know, they know what they like, and it's within a kind of a safe parameter of the known. Whereas we've got this, as we talked about in our last episode, like crypto confusion and curiosity and confusion. There is so many unknowns, and that can be very scary. Which actually, in itself, even if you're not necessarily a closed-minded person, which that's said without judgment, it's just a characteristic. that level of complexity and confusion might actually create that sense of closing down, because it's scary to look beyond what you already know.
But what does the authentic wise person say? They don't say I'm against it or it's this. They say I don't know.
Yes.
They say I have no experience of it. You know, I
Yes.
think back over the years, Dan, of you know, my younger years of trying to wake people up to certain, you know, things, you know, going back through the years of, you know, looking to psyops and, you know, the myriad things that, you know, rabbit holes I've been down the last 20 years, is what I've realized in all that time, what I realized quite early on was it's never a debate. Because what it really is, you know, somebody who's openly curious to look and somebody who won't look. That's why it's so unsatisfactory, almost, that kind of, you know, attrition you get in those interactions often, is because rather it be, you know, we both come to maybe a documentary we've seen or a piece of writing or some evidence, we both look at it, have a debate, and then go away on different sides. What it is I come on and say, have you read this, look at this? And no, I'm not going to. Yes. That's what's so frustrating about it. And you realise, you know, I'm up for the debate and I'm not looking to win you over, but you never really get that equal debate, because actually it's about avoidance. And I understand that, because a lot of it's about fear, you know, and not wanting to go there. But often I'm just searching for the debate and exploration. I don't have an agenda behind it, but that's what's so frustrating. Actually, it's not that you've looked and you've come to a different conclusion, which I'd be fine with, but it's often the frustration that you haven't looked. You know, the number of times people say, I've sent you maybe sent you a video or sent you this, but what happens to protect themselves from looking? They won't look at it and then debate it. They just won't look. And some of that can be conscious or unconscious. So there's so much going on there, Dan, but you're absolutely right. What leads us, I think, into a lot of these areas and get interested in them is curiosity at its core, isn't it? You know, I think I'm like you, I'm endlessly curious, and therefore, you know, I want to know so I can decide for myself. And I'm fascinated, with no judgment on it, about, you know, sort of people who aren't curious about things. And I'll give a great example, because I lived in France for many years, and generally, and maybe it's an English trait, it's fascinating. When we go somewhere, maybe it's an explorer, we're on an island, who knows, we can analyse why, all the different traits of the nationalities. But give an example, it's a bit cliche. When English people go somewhere, they usually got a pub crawl, especially when you're young. And that's not just because we love drinking, it's to go and check everywhere out. You arrive somewhere and you go and look at everything. So then you decide which are your favourite places for the week. And so there is a method to that madness beyond binge drinking. You know, there is a you know, curiosity. Let's check it all out. What I found fascinating is I ran a bar in the Alps for many years, and ski resorts aren't huge, but quite a place you could easily walk around in an evening and take it all in. And I mean, I literally had some lovely guys, French guys, who ran a bar underneath our bar for years. And these are good guys, we were friends, whatever. They never came up in 15 years to even just to look at it. And that wasn't, and people might think, well, they were, you know, unhappy with it. I mean, genuinely, it's hard to explain. It wasn't about, you know, boycotting or snubbing. It's just part of the culture. It's like, they don't go and look. That's, you know, you're up there, I'm down here. And I'll give this other example. My local supermarket was just near where I lived, Dan. And, you know, the French couple running there, I've been running it for, 30, 40 years. It was at the bottom of this small town. And one day I said, I'm nipping up to this other place. And they'd never been to the top of town. They lived slightly below the supermarket. They drove up to the supermarket, and, you know, 500 yards above where they lived was a whole other sector of this town. They had never been. And that blew my mind. And I'm not judging them. But I was fascinated that I, you know, like to be curious. I want to see everything, even if it's, you know, not great. I want to go and explore. And then, because part of exploration is not just finding what you like, it's finding things you can discard. You know, so even that's what I say about learning about even crypto. If you can look into it with no pressure thinking you need to get involved in it, you can look into it then say it's not for me. But it's the curiosity to look and find out. And if you're not curious, that's fine. But the problematic thing is people writing things off they haven't looked at. It's almost like rubbishing a book you've never read. You know, that's what can be problematic. And that can be a barrier to other people if that opinion is very strong, is very repeated, and it's not based in kind of nuance and more awareness.
Yeah, whether we like to accept it or not, we are still relatively pack or herd animals. We end up in group dynamics where, you know, if there's a dominant view on something in a small group or a larger group, even it can infiltrate the rest of the group, and it can then prohibit people from using their own imaginative faculties because they don't want to go against the herd. You know, they don't want to go. And, you know, as awake as one may or may not be, the reality is a lot of these processes are subconscious, they're unconscious, and we don't realize we're doing it. And the thing is, with this type of subject, we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
We literally don't know what we don't know. Yeah. So if you have preconceptions before you even begin, or your conceptions of something are based on limited information, then you're missing out on the opportunity to learn something that may or may not, well, it could or it may not benefit you. But until we go from not knowing what we don't know and into then knowing what we don't know, which is what most people feel like when they get into crypto. Yeah. It's like, oh my God, there is so much. I didn't know all this stuff, but now I can see all these words. But it enables us to have then a level of discernment. And for those people who are abjectly against crypto or blockchain or this new technologies, if you come to that perspective from an informed view and you've done your research and you thought, no, it's not for me, at least then you have a good rationale and reason on a personal basis about why you've chosen not to.
Yeah, that's totally valid. Absolutely, yeah.
But in many cases, that's not what's happening. And we get, I get a lot of comments on our content, feedback. And I start to read between the lines because we get objections. We get objections to what we're talking about. And I'm not going to get into any specifics around any individuals, of course, but you can see that there is in order to make the statements that certain people make, it comes from a place of not knowing. And because the types of objections that come up would probably not be raised if they had a deeper understanding of the subject. And my fear is, and I anticipated this, having been part of the freedom movement for the last couple of years, or the kind of awake communities or whatnot, and yourself in the same way, is that you do start to see a lot of binaries in the communities. And the problem is, when you take something like central bank digital currencies, which we also talked about on the show, which we know is underpinned by digital technologies, which are similar to crypto and other blockchain. In fact, some of them are shared infrastructure. It's a double-edged sword. But to look at one part of the equation and not look at the other is it means you're looking at the maths and it's not going to add up.
Yeah.
So it's important, for those in this community to be open-minded, because what's really difficult for me to see is how so many people in the last couple of years who have been literally, and if you're watching this, you're probably one of them, like myself, you've been wanting people to read the information about COVID, about the jabs, to help people understand what's really happening. And you've been really frustrated that the people you're sharing that information with have not been open-minded to actually wanting to read it. They're closing it down. Now you flip the equation and we're talking about a different subject, and other people are now saying, oh, you need to have a look at it. We recommend you invite, or we not even saying we need you to look at this. No. It's an invitation. It's an invitation. It's an invitation to look at something different. Now the boot's on the other foot. And now the same people who got frustrated, or some of the same people who got frustrated by other people not listening, are now doing the same. And they're closing down. And that's, I find that a little hypocritical.
And I think my experience, I've said it before, Dan, those voices that shout so loud, I'm getting the cliche, but a lot of them are shouting loud as keyboard warriors more than anything. Because my experience has been, I've had those kind of accusations of anything to do with crypto is all evil, it's absolutely in with the control structure. But, that's why. But what's interesting, they're not the kind of opinions that come to an actual talk. If you really want to have that debate, and it's an interesting debate, because I'm up for the discussion, come to the talk. My issue is not opinions, different opinions. That's what is so ripe and rich. That's what I said. I always want perspectives, and share those perspectives and bounce them off each other and evolve together in our learning. And they're all very valuable. But it's this kind of throwing out something. Obviously, that the culture of, internet trolling, all that is about being able to throw out really, strong statements and very, quite often quite, with quite a strong energy behind them, and can be quite vitriolic, because they're not there in a room to have that, to look at the nuances and be. I don't mean challenge as in everyone turn on them and say you're wrong, but to be challenged as in let's have a back and forth. What you're getting is somebody sort of giving, this is how it is, not going to a long discussion why, but just, and then not really listen to any other points. So I think that's what I find. I said, what's the word? Not sad, disappointing, or just not helpful, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
And because the other thing I tell you about is I like to be really empathetic and meet people wherever they're at. Everyone's at different awareness levels in the whole spectrum of the world. We're all in our own personal journeys, and particularly if you look at the last 3 years, and particularly people who would have been new to a lot of awareness of how much deception and agendas and they've had the rug pulled from under their lives, and that's huge. They've been through so much trauma just from that process. They're taking that in. That may have had, as we know, ramifications in their family life and their work life. Been under incredible pressure, but done amazing to stand up for their truth and go on their path. And what I find really problematic and not nice is sometimes they're being shamed by people who are aware, almost the kind of perfectionist or the puritanical kind of viewpoint of, once you're in awake to this stuff, you need to be here, these are the rules. And it's not really taking into account where people are at, and I think that can actually not nurture and support them on their journey, and actually can really feel like they're piling more pressure on them, and not allowing them to feel supported on their organic journey to come to their own conclusions about all these things. And some people might feel they're further down the road. They might be right, or they might be wrong. I mean, they could be right about what they're saying, but this kind of will to say you've got to be where I am now, and you've got to get here, or you're behind, is not really respecting their journey. And if we look at all of our journeys, there was always a time where I was in the matrix, lost as a young person. So I had to go through that, so you have to go through. And I think I keep saying the word journey because I'm all about the journey, Dan. I think there's this feeling of like trying to speed that up or get somewhere quickly or be perfect now. Whereas a lot of that kind of energy is putting a lot of pressure on people. It's not supporting them where they're at. It's not realistic with where they're at, maybe practically or emotionally. And it's not encouraging them to go at their own pace, which is so important. And respecting their own journey and their way to make their conclusions themselves. So you're absolutely right. That kind of purist idea or very puritanical thing that can sweep in of we had so many issues with the kind of people in the COVID narrative kind of shaming people outside of it, shaming you for, being not in favor of the injections, or shaming you for not wearing a mask. We had all that, but we can see, unfortunately, over the last years, I've seen it in lots of ways, that creeping in within these communities of saying, for example, well, you're awake now, but I'm going to shame you for using, you bought something for your family on Amazon Prime. This kind of any little thing you do that isn't perfectly, perfectly decentralized, perfectly sovereign is a black mark. Whereas for me, it's like I look at what progress have you made? You made huge progress and you're on the path to improvement, and that takes time. So kind of berating people for very binary things on their journey and they're not there yet, I just don't think is a supportive. I'm just giving my own opinion, Dan. I don't think it's very supportive, and I think it can be a bit damaging to people because they've got so much on their plate already. So I just like to meet people wherever they're at and respect that we've all come from where we've come from and we're all on our respective journeys. And I think that's just a much more sustainable way forward for everybody.
Yeah, it's healthy. And I think I don't know where the quote came from, but the idea that perfection is an unobtainable standard. It's incredibly unhealthy to try and strive towards a level of perfectionism.
It could be paralyzing.
Yeah. And this puritanical approach, this is something I've actually been examining more broadly because it showed up through the COVID chapter. It's almost like the church of the vaccine. It became very puritanical. It became very extreme, fundamentalist almost. There's a term, vaxism, that arose out of the way that people are approaching it, actually of kind of fundamentalist behavior. but it was deeply puritanical. And I've started to look at some of the kind of the social cultural factors that may have led to this. And I've had some interesting conversations with some of the psychologists that have been on the show over the last couple of years. And it's a lot of the common themes around a lack of belonging, a sense of, lack of connection with other people. After all, society has become increasingly fragmented. We're more digitally connected than ever before, but physically connected. During the course of the last few years, where people are separated through lockdowns and social distancing and whatnot, but even aside from periods of imposed restrictions, how deeply connected are we to our locality anymore, our community, people nearby? How much time are we actually spending in person with friendship groups and like-minded people? So there's that sense of lack of connection, which is a driving factor of this more puritanical behavior, or at least associated with. And then this idea of a lack of meaning and purpose, in the sense that we lack a kind of internal compass that guides us from a point of what is our life all about, what is the deepest essence of who we are. And therefore we get caught up in majoring in minor things.
Yeah, it's not a holistic view, Dan. I always want to say that, if I meet somebody, it's based on their intention and who they are and what they're doing, not on a tick list of, do you use Google? Are you on Amazon Prime? Kind of, that's the kind of point scoring. It's very binary. And I can understand that, because almost, the deeper, more challenging work is to, have good intentions and to be good sort of in your interpersonal relationships and work on your own growth. It's almost much easier to go on a binary checklist of, I don't use Amazon, I'm a good person, I've got points. I don't, I de-Google my phone. And when I say that, I'm not knocking those steps. I respect those steps, I understand the value in them. So it's always that way. I'm not anti those either. I'm for all of them, but it's when it can slip towards more that as kind of your values based on those actions, rather than, your intention or what you're doing. So, that's fascinating. It's like, I think everything get lumped in. I'm going to imagine, is a QR code, that's on a door for a vaccine passport to sort of check into a venue during COVID, as the same as a QR code that is linking you to a freedom get together to discuss solutions and ideas too. A lot of people lump it. It's a QR code. You're in with the WEF. It's all evil. Just what I mean? They're not the same. Their intention is completely different. They are a practical, in a sense, a graphic version of a web link. And my issue with the puritanical side is, often you want to go down that line. You might have lofty ideals, and I respect them. You might be there, but I know from experience the majority of people aren't there. They're thrown out there. But if you don't want to use that, well, I want you to never use a web link in your life ever again. Or never use. It's almost like you're knocking things at better, but kind of negating. Are you living at that level yourself realistically? And if you are, great, good on you, and maybe you want to get there. But it's too easy to just find the negatives everywhere and say that's not perfection. And I think, we thought about it. If you find a solution that's more decentralized, somebody might come and attack it and say, well, it's not perfectly decentralized. But you're missing the point that it's an improvement from where we've come. So we're on that road.
Yes.
But rather be pleased about the improvement, just pick it apart and say it's not perfect. And you can always do that. And I think that can be very paralyzing and can also be a block to solutions coming forward, Dan. So, I see it quite problematic. And I know for myself, I had a period of sort of raw food journey where the discipline was really helpful, but the perfectionism can actually be a trap.
Yes.
Because it's the old question of, are you actually free? If you're stuck in perfectionism, you're not actually free. So this is such a big topic, but it ties into everything in life. Is like, you get people who have that real feel of, I don't want to be tracked anywhere. I don't want to put my email into any computer. I don't want to do that. And even if you're achieving that, but that's your kind of way of living, how free are you? To me, it sounds like you're on the run. I'm not judging that, but it's like, you could argue there'd be somebody who's absolutely aware of the surveillance, but doesn't care, because it's like they're on their path and they're going to do that regardless. I'm not giving the answer to that question, but I'd like to pose that question. Who's freer out of those two people? The person who's basically saying, I would avoid every camera I can see. I'm not going to put my data anywhere. They're kind of, trying to be almost on the run from it. Well, in a sense, that's more tied into the system than somebody who doesn't care as much. You know, I'm not putting an argument on either side, but I'm just throwing out these thoughts about it, that it's an interesting thing of what is actually freedom, you know.
Yeah, fascinating. It's fascinating. Yeah, I mean, as you were talking, I was thinking we've almost got down to like truth or trump cards, where it's like, how many points have you got for your minimal Google usage, or like, you know, it's like, but to your point around the food standards, you know, I've been through periods like that, and I look back with real fondness around the discipline and the standards I was able to hold myself to, and the results that came with it. So you're right. When it becomes all encompassing, you are no longer free. And, you know, I remember, you know, I was incredibly fit at the time, like 10% body fat, training twice a day. It was crazy times in my 20s, really just made the decision that I wanted to, having been through like 5 to 6 years of intense partying, I was like, enough's enough. I've got to do something different. And I went like all the way the other way. But my fitness friends were talking about like having cheat days as though you were cheating yourself, like you were cheating. And I said, I don't resonate with that. I don't like the idea that I'm cheating. So we just called it free range. There's a free range day, free choice. But then it didn't become like a day. It was just like, actually, I have total freedom to eat what I like, but I choose. I choose. I make the decision consciously to eat this type of food and do this type of training. And other times I make this decision, which is completely the opposite of this decision. And that it comes back to that point of freedom. Then you have freedom. You still make a choice that acts in your interest, but you have the freedom not to at the same time.
Exactly, Dan. I had it with my raw food journey, where I went 6 months 100% raw, and I'm delighted I did it. It was amazing, because that was an exercise in discipline as much as anything. Obviously, it was an exercise in healing and improving my health, and it was extraordinary. But the discipline helped. But obviously, long term, I didn't get trapped in that, as in that's the way it be. So it's almost like discipline is different from perfectionism.
Yes.
You know, because you can have the discipline and maybe avoid something because it's for a particular goal. But real freedom is when you can come back. You don't have to avoid forever. So it's almost like real freedom is being able to walk down the street in London despite the cameras and, you know, the whatever's going on, or that you feel you might be tracked by, you know, your digital footprint, whatever. Real freedom is not being on the run, or having to avoid. You know, you might do that as a practice or something to help you break habits, but actually real freedom is being able to come back into the world and, you know, and function them anywhere rather than needing to be avoiding it, you know. So sometimes the discipline is there to break the addiction, the habit, but actually the real freedom is the mastery, where you can be in it in a balanced way and sort of bring it back into balance. So it's a fascinating journey to be on, because it brings up all those questions about perfectionism and, you know, what is real freedom and what's avoidance, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, it reminds me of a conversation that Aubrey Marcus was having on his show, where he gave this example of a situation in a bar where there's always the possibility, due to alcohol consumption, that someone says something or bumps into something and it triggers into a "what did you say, mate?" or "what?" And he gave the example of two different types of reaction to that. The person who is fully sovereign, fully owns themselves, the person bumps into them and says, what are you doing? What do you just say to me? And the person who's fully sovereign just laughs and just says nothing. Versus the person who's less developed in their own self, and they respond by raising to it and say, "What are you saying?" And they go into attack mode, and it ends up into a grapple or a fight.
Yeah.
Whereas the other person who just says "ha ha," you know, and just owns themselves, doesn't end up in the fight, and it just dissipates.
Totally. If we look back to the COVID era, you know, and this was by design, what did they do? In essence, they gave fake power to the most disempowered people. That was the kind of shaming narrative that I remember famously, you know, Cressida Dick, you know, the head of the Met Police, was using that word of basically, you know, encouraging people. And what I experienced in society was the most disenfranchised, disempowered people were given this kind of false power and almost given a license. They'd never had a voice. They didn't feel they had a voice. They were given a voice for a purpose. And it was often they were the ones barking loudest. So I do think, you know, the more, and I'm sure people can relate to it in their own lives, the more empowered you feel, the less you are bothered by where other people's actions are going or what they're doing, because you're on your path and you're less triggered by it. So it is, I think it does come down to a cortis empowerment of needing people to be where you are. Because if you're feeling right yourself, you don't need them to be where you are. You can sit with them where they are. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting dynamic in that sense, Dan.
Yeah, and it brings us to the difference between one having your own standards and discipline, and having that self-control in a dominion. Because the interesting thing about the word sovereignty is, if you look at its roots, it does talk about dominion, but it's dominion in this context over oneself, not over another. And the moment you start holding a standard over others, you're then going from self-dominion to externalizing that dominion, and potentially control type behaviors start eking out.
Yeah.
And this will be a subject of one of my solo podcasts in the coming weeks, where I'll talk about how we have to catch these patterns, because a lot of the time we're talking about standing against authoritarianism, and how this rise of authoritarianism is creating all these conditions. But we have to catch the inner authoritarian, because when we start to impose, when we look back at what's happened during the COVID time, they're impositions. It's impositions upon our life.
Yeah.
So inflicting or imposing our standards, or one's standards, on someone else, in a way, is an authoritarian behavior type. Yeah. So it comes back to, and actually, to be able to see something in someone else, we have to also first see it in ourselves, or have experienced it ourselves in order to know it. So it's important. And Dr. Kelly Brogan, she's an amazing natural health activist. She talks about this and how she's becoming more mindful of those inner controlling patterns that show up in controlling others. And it's all interlinked. So that Puritanism comes from an unattainable desire to achieve perfection, but it can also spill over into this wanting everyone else to hold the same standard. And bringing it into the context of this conversation, like you said, the examples, I've had it before, unless if you're still using Google, you're part of the problem, or you're still buying stuff on Amazon. And again, I don't disagree with the individual points. It's just when it's then imposed on others as a reason to not connect. And I think this is what's happening with the crypto conversation, is that we are seeing these binary viewpoints that is preventing some people, because of the group dynamics, from therefore embracing the subject and actually exploring it for themselves, following their natural curiosities, and also to then see the possibilities of how, yes, this could be a road to dystopia, but it could also be a road not to utopia, but a road to a pathway to some of the solution.
Yeah, have quality. Sorry, Dan, to interrupt you, but it's almost like you see the qualities in it and what it can do, rather than just say it's not perfect. So that, there are issues. That's why I like to compare kind of asset classes or whatever. There are pros and cons to all of them. Yeah. So I think none of us, anybody who's balanced, no one's coming and delivering. I certainly don't, and I don't know many people who I respect in crypto do either. Don't come to you and say, this is freedom, come and get the crypto. It's merely a lot of what we're doing is a more decentralized tool of exchange. It has a lot more sovereignty. There are benefits to it. And so often I like to run and say, this is the way. There are benefits that outweigh some of the old ways, that, there are improvements. So often comparing them is what's so important. But somebody can just, and I would say somebody will really attack crypto and pull it apart, whatever. Well, if those people are fully intangible assets now, they're only in, gold, silver, and bartering food, then absolutely you've removed yourself from those issues. But the majority of those people who say that are still, banking with fiat currency and, centrally tied to the legacy banking system, the whole debt slavery system around that. So it's really about looking at the differences rather than going, that's not a perfect utopia, therefore it's out, picking on the problems without looking at the pros and cons of everything, and that they might be stepping stones on a journey. And I think that's also what I have concerns around, outside of crypto, but everything is almost people feeling the pressure they've got to get somewhere very quickly. And what that can happen is that they can actually jeopardize their own well-being, practically and emotionally, Dan.
Yeah.
Because if we're kind of kind to ourselves and realize that we've been living under all sorts of, psyops and trauma-based mind control, and maybe for generations, I'd argue, for a long, long time. Therefore, we're on our way coming out of that, but we're in nappies, all of us.
Yes.
So the idea we should suddenly be these prize fighters and take on the beast system, that's a noble goal, and that's what we want to get to. But the idea that could happen by next week or next year can kind of be a paralyzing and something that can jeopardize your own journey. So taking steps of improvement, knowing you're on that way and not trying to rush there, I think is really valuable, because I like the analogy of, say you had you did have a master training a young, martial arts, trainee to go up against, a big boss man at the end of the, end of level boss man. Well, I'm sure that trainer wouldn't throw you straight in, because although you sometimes need to fight better opponents to improve, you don't go straight in for your first bout training in there, because what can happen? You'd be absolutely jeopardized and never come back from it. So for me, it's about building the muscles and working up from where we are. Because when I see people who are really powerfully sovereign and they're living that life, it's because they have got there on their own journey and their energetics are there. So it's not just that they've learned a lot of skills, they've actually embodying it, and therefore they can walk that walk. So the idea that everybody should be there by last week, or, if you're not there by last week, then you've got to get there by next week, I think is unrealistic and doesn't really take into account where you come from or where you're at, and can lead to people feeling inadequate and feeling pressure, where just the fact you're on this path of looking at things is a huge improvement. If you come out of the matrix and you're starting looking, that in itself is huge work. So I always want to, I don't mean that in a cheesy way, but congratulate people for, standing up and just walking their truth and walking, this quite narrow path, Dan. And knowing that you're just going to make improvements, and that's good enough, that you're making improvements.
Yeah.
And I like Tony Robbins' line on this, that, he said people overestimate what they can achieve in a year and underestimate what they can achieve in 5.
Yes.
So almost trying to bust your gut to say by this time next year, or, I'm going to be here, here and here. Often people burn out and don't get there, very disappointed. If you quietly made improvements the next 5 years, you'd be amazed when you look back at what you've done, what you've achieved. So again, for me, it's about nurturing a sustainable journey that's unique to yourself and in tune with your values and your priorities. Where's your work and your energy called to be, and what tools do you need? And if ordering something of Amazon Prime really helps you on your journey to empower people, then I'm all right with that.
Yes. Yeah. That's another quote. I can't remember it now. Like, you can't pay your bills in other people's opinions. It's, it's about forming your own worldview on these things. And I think this part of the conversation has been about how other people's views, how other people's opinions, particularly strong views on the subject, can actually become a barrier to someone embracing a path or extinguishing their curiosity. And that's something that I think we have to be mindful of. But it also raises the question that in this part of the conversation around the barrier of knowledge, and when you almost open the curtain to this new world of blockchain and crypto and Web3, all of a sudden you can see how vast the terrain is, and that in itself can become overwhelming.
Yeah.
And I experienced it myself yesterday. I mean, I was so inspired by the workshop last night. It massively switched on that I want to know, I want to learn. And we finished it, classic session. We finished about 10:30 last night, 2.5 hours of, deep discussion and Q&A and exploring different points on people's journey. But it sparked so much curiosity in me. And, I will fess up, I was awake for another 1.5 hours, like researching all these concepts there, like to try and, I felt like I couldn't sleep unless I got the answer to these things. But of course it's futile, because it is a vast terrain. And to be fair, looking back, I'm tired today. Yeah. I stayed up late, but I was so excited. I was really excited to learn. And, I think one of the things, we go to school and we don't necessarily have that much excitement about going to school. We learn, we get on the factory machine of go to school, go to university, potentially get a job and get in line for the production line. And we lose that love of learning. So last night, the spark of the love of learning came right back on. And I was just in that moment, I wanted to explore. But the problem in this case is I was chasing like an endless volume of information, and I was never going to satisfy myself. So I had to put a cap on it. I was like, I've got to go to bed, otherwise tomorrow's going to be really tricky. I've had a bad night's sleep for different reasons than that before. Child related, for those of you who are parents and know what it's like to have a baby or a young child. So I had to cap it. But what it showed me is that there is so much to learn, and I if I continued, I would have gotten myself in a state of overwhelm because. And that's a pattern I recognize in myself because of my curiosity. Like, in one hand, my curiosity is a gift, but it's also a curse because it takes me on the path of wanting to know everything, like, as soon as possible. And I came back to your message through the fundamental discussion through the workshop, which was get the basics in place. And actually, when you bring it right down to the handful, it really is a handful of basics. It's like, all right, I can continue to learn these more advanced things, but if it becomes a detriment to me taking the steps I need to take on the fundamentals and repeating the fundamentals over and over, like going to the gym and the disciplines we've talked about, building those healthy habits and disciplines, then we lose sight. And that then becomes a barrier. And I think for a lot of people, unless we catch ourselves, we can get overwhelmed by the sheer volume of the landscape and the emerging landscape. And it is moving fast. We're in that technological growth curve where it's moving incredibly fast.
Well, exactly what I was going to say, Dan. You're like me, you're curious and learning, but also it's live. That's why we've called the podcast Uncharted Territory. As you're learning it, it's expanding, quicker than you can get. So it's not like there's a body of work, you can digest it and it's done, and you can go, right, what do I think? It is shifting, literally day by day. And that's where, I like to say to people, everybody's new to crypto. So often there's this feeling of, I don't know, there's experts, it's new to everybody. This is nascent and things are shifting and evolving all the time. So, hopefully that can put you at ease a certain level of thinking, I've got to get somewhere. It's constantly evolving. But once you've got those baseline blocks in there, then I think you can explore in a freer way because you understand the basics, you've got that foundation, then you can go and explore in tune with you. And I echo your point, Dan. I wasn't awake to what was going on, but something inside me meant that I was very cynical at school about what I was teaching. I played the game. I didn't feel that I was actually, that I was the kind of guy who never read the whole book because I didn't want to read a book I didn't choose myself, and I just got the study notes and I winged the essay. I was a kind of exam specialist to avoid, doing any work because it didn't speak to me. And whereas when I started, looking at Bitcoin, whatever, I'm actually reading books, I'm enjoying them. I'm like, get in there. This is, and finding that passion for learning and increasing your knowledge, in adult life, particularly if you've had not a great experience at school, as I didn't, and many people didn't. That's really rewarding and really powerful and again, because it's from your choice. No one's forcing me to read that book or write an essay. I want to understand it, and the more I dig in, I can go on my own tangents and look. So I think it has so many qualities like that. And like I said, there was, a guy who's with us last night who's come to my in-person events. I really loved what he said a few weeks ago when I saw him. Was like, I loved getting to Bitcoin because I started maybe think about and get curious about money and value.
Yes.
So it as like our conversations, they always go around into philosophy and, personal experience and sovereignty. I mean, it's all in there. All these topics are just a vehicle for our own curiosity and growth, aren't they, Dan?
Yeah, and that's So to zoom in and zoom out again. So as a result of last night, I was like, bring it back down to basics. It's like I've got digital assets. I have some holdings, but I haven't yet extracted them onto a hard wallet. And
so you haven't technically got them? Then.
No, so I haven't technically got them. They're still on the exchange. So I'm not fully sovereign in that space. So before I go off down this tangent of like all these other things, get the thing ordered. I've got a 4-day weekend coming up. Get the thing ordered, get that piece done, breathe, and then get excited again, and then move on. So it's. But to your point around the client you referred to, who said that it's inspired them to learn more about the financial system and how it all operates. That's exactly what it's done for me. I mean, as part of my insane research last night, I was reading about like comparable times in economic history. I was reading about the Great Depression last night at 11 a.m. and 11 p.m. at night. I was reading about the transition from the gold standard. I most likely have covered these things in my economic history class at university, but I didn't actively learn. I wasn't looking at it from a standpoint of understanding how the world works. I was doing it to get my degree, whereas now I want to understand how the systems operate.
Totally, and look at both of us, Daniel. I did economics A level, and it bored me to tears, and it was awful. I mean, it was so unengaging, And you said you studied economics. I worked in one of my first jobs in London before I went out the Alps was at the stock exchange, and I worked for a broker a bit in the settlements department. But I've learned so much more in the last 2-3 years about macroeconomics. That's made it all visible and tangible and much more interesting than I ever did. In all those structured learnings, and there's a great need to, and I think that's why I was so passionate to begin my sort of tour of giving financial research talks, because it's money is a subject that affects us all. This is flowing through. People. I like the kind of quote. People say, I'm scared by the markets. Well, you're in the market. Everybody is. If you've got any money coming through you, you are involved in the money markets at some level. That currency you're holding, even if it's pounds, is. People don't realize that's being traded. That's fluctuating value. You're in the markets. So, it affects everybody, and that's why it's powerful that we haven't been educated about it. It's fundamental. That's why, the financial reset is such an important topic, and it is the fabric of our lives, whether we like it or not, the financial, how it works. And when you get beyond that stigma about money, and that you can get that, as we know, people can get very, money's evil, it's really about shifting, it's the energy of value. And there are lots of ways to transact in value. And so getting interested in that discussion again, and how can we move value, and how can value systems evolve, and what different ways are there, is transformative. And it brings up so many questions about so many things, and it's intrinsic to our lives wherever we go. We're always involved in an economy of sorts. There is no escaping economy, even if your economy is bartering mangoes. You're still an economy. So I think it is fundamental, and that's why I'm passionate about, making these discussions accessible and, hopefully sometimes even fun, maybe.
Well, absolutely. Certainly was the case for myself last night. And, we had some lovely feedback from the other attendees. And I think, it has sparked a new desire in people to learn more about the world and how it works. And that's ultimately what we're all learning through this process. And interesting enough, I did have a very good experience in my schooling. In my second year, I was very lucky with a lot of the teachers I had. There were some that certainly didn't come up to scratch, but my economics teacher is what inspired me to study economics at university. Because, right. But the pennies only really dropped now, like 20 years on, because he said, economics will teach you everything you need to know about the way the world works.
Right, there you go.
And that has become so apparent in the last couple of years.
Coming to focus, isn't it?
Rich focus. And honestly, several times during the course of what I was doing in the pandemic podcast, and looking at the economic incentives, the reasons why certain things are happening, and and how certain systems operate. And I was racking my brains to try and remember so much of what I learned at university. Because the fundamentals of economics will teach you why the world operates in the way it does, even down to human behavior. We had a behavioral science module at university through an economic lens, which was the study of why people do what they do. And that is essential knowledge. Looking back over the last couple of years, we're all scratching our heads saying, how on earth did this just happen? People like Matthias Desmet comes along with mass formation and kind of brings a layer of understanding from the psychological perspective. But we have to, being able to have a knowledge of what's happening to the macro level. It might not be sexy learning about macroeconomic policy and why the inflation rates and the interest rates are all interconnected to all the banking crisis right now. But actually having that understanding is power.
It gets us out of victimhood, Dan, because if you look at it simply, you don't get scammed if you understand the scam. We talked about it, that scams potentially will never end. People might argue that at some point there's a golden age where there's no scams. Who knows? We'll wait and see. But the way to mitigate that is to no longer get scammed through education. So if you understand the scam, you understand what's going on, you don't get scammed. So education is the way out of it, rather than purely railing at the scammers. I mean, I always say I'm not defending the scammers and, think they should be supported, but I'm understanding that what's in my power, not necessarily to wipe them out of ever trying to scam you, but they're there to maybe, teach you lessons to hone yourself that if you're clued up, you don't get scammed. So education can be a tool out of so many of these things. And, Dan, I like the way you touched on it, because that whole topic of 1971 and the gold standard is a fascinating story. And it's interesting from so many angles, and it's pivotal to where we are today. So, sometimes people ask me about the financial reset, and I'll start back there, and we can go back further to Bretton Woods in 1944. But the cycles and what's played out before is so interesting, and looking at it, and we were just never, I was never taught about it at school, and it can be when you find somebody you can relay that info, and hopefully we go some way to doing that. But, I remember, Kiyosaki's books really helped me on my journey, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And he's got one called Fake, about fake money and fake teachers. And so finding resources that can demystify it can turn it from a scary, confusing subject into something that empowering, and means you free yourself from being a victim of the scams.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, this brings up so many philosophical conversations and even political conversations, because again, in my thinking around this piece of content that I want to create separate to this, around what catching ourselves not becoming what we stand against, there's an element of we can fall into the victim trap. There's a triangle called Cartman drama triangle, and it explains how we can become the victim, and therefore we become the oppressed because we perceive an outside reason for our oppression. And we see this in all forms of life. And we start to then think about, how do we tear down other people's towers rather than building our own up?
Yeah.
And finding our own power, know. And actually this victim mentality, if you look at it more broadly in the culture that we live in right now, it's pervasive.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people in our movement pointing fingers at the victimhood within other groups outside our own group, in-group, out-group, and how certain groups are playing the victim card, and that's unhealthy. Yet we've got to catch ourselves doing it ourselves. And I think in the current climate, where there is such great inequality and there is such centralization of power, if you were to point your finger at what is fundamentally driving the problems that we're facing right now, is the concentration of power. And yes, decentralization, it needs rebalancing. We've got to be looking at that, the decentralized approaches, which crypto and blockchain offer the potential to do that once you can get your head around the mechanisms of how that can happen. I understand all the skepticism around why the incumbent power structures wouldn't want that to happen. Of course, comes back to economics. That quote my teacher told me, once you know how the system works, you can't unsee it. Like it's the matrix, you see it. But going back to the point here, when this puritanical perfectionism, the hard truth is the conversations that we're having around potential solutions are often met with more animosity than the conversation about the problem. And what is definitely true, I can tell you from like online media statistics, is that the episodes I've done out of the 500-600 now, the ones that are actually positively focused on driving change, get the least reach. Like I can easily go like, like the WHO are doing what? The WHO are doing what? And like do like a hype video around like, and actually what's also happening, without going on a complete tangent, is that now people are exaggerating the reality to make it more fearful because it gets more attention.
Fear porn sells, it's clickbait, and you see that, that's rife on the alternative media platforms, the clickbait, and again, people are what gets the clicks, and fear porn can be it's visceral, therefore it's addictive. It's a spiking your adrenaline. And also it is, as we all can relate to this. It's much easier just to rail at the problems. They do exist, than to get up and think, what am I going to do? It is much easier, and so I completely understand it. But I think it's absolutely key that we come back to ourselves and move beyond that, because I'm with you, Dan, that the way out, and I view the way out as a long-term thing. I think that's my thesis, that this is about turning a massive, this isn't something that's happened recently. This is turning around generations upon generations of certain things. So what I feel is realistic take is that going to take time. But we're the beginning of that, and the pioneers are a bit excited about that without feeling pressure. We've got to do it by next year, and oh my God. And I think, the powers that be want you to feel like you've got no time, want you to feel like, dystopia is just around the corner. And that plays into it. So you're absolutely right, Dan, that you're going to get more attention on something that's dramatic because it feeds that kind of, even if it's negative excitement, rather than solution often takes more thought and work and what am I going to do and more grind, more kind of harder thinking.
Yeah. But if it is true that the powers that be that want us to feel that it's bleak and just around the corner, well, we're certainly doing a great job of fanning the flames. Yeah, we are, because that type of inflammatory content makes you feel like it is right here, right now. Yeah. And we're actually falling into the trap.
Yeah.
Which is why I love these conversations, because they're expansive, they're nuanced, it's holistic.
And like we can rail at the mainstream media never going back to correct themselves, right? They never go back and say, well, hang on, what we said last week was bollocks. The same happens in the alternative media where, there are people, and again, not naming names, but they're putting out such a riddle thing that doesn't happen. But there's such an appetite for it. So it's on both sides. They're putting it out. There's an appetite for it. It's so short-termism that people don't go, well, hang on, that didn't happen. That didn't happen. That didn't happen. Why am I still watching this one going, this is going to happen, when you've said, you've been saying that solid for 3 years. We're going to be in a FEMA camp next week. Well, it's next week now. It's next week now. I mean, the same happens on the hopium side as well.
Yes. This
is going to happen by next week. They're going to be arrested by next week. What's next week? I mean, both to me are nonsense narratives that aren't balanced and holistic. But yeah, it's a real problem that short-termism. I mentioned it last night by crypto, Dan, is that crypto was finished after FTX. Remember, it was the end of crypto, right? Oh my God, this is the end of the fad. Bitcoin fell to $15,500. That was its death. This is over. It's now $28,000. So it's a funny way to die. We're now 80% up from where we are. But even in the mainstream, people think it's all about just grabbing the attention at time and not having, that's why being able to zoom out and have a bit of perspective wherever you are on the perspectives is so important, because they want you pulled in this endless roller coaster. And that's where the controlled op likes to be, is pull you into roller coasters. I'm in hope or extreme fear. I'm ungrounded and I'm exhausted by the journey. And that's the biggest barrier to quietly getting on and making tangible progress in your own life or your family's life or community or village locally. That's where the energy can be used so valuably. But of course it gets sucked into these kind of narratives that are short term and exciting.
Well, if I literally feel into my body as I think about the last 10 years, let alone the last 3 years, it's all that the power structures that currently exist and the incumbent leaders have created that environment where everything is a crisis, everything is a panic, we need to be afraid of everything. It's apocalyptic thinking. We don't even see happy ending movies anymore.
Yeah.
It used to be the thing. Everyone used to look forward to the big happy ending. To the point, one of my favorite movies of all time, Wayne's World. Just get my sense of humor from. If you want a clue where my sense of humor lies. They made a big joke about it being the big happy ending because it was a thing.
Yeah.
But now it's apocalypse, and it's permeated our culture. And I just feel tension when I think about it.
Yeah.
But I think, and everything is extreme. Everything is over-exaggerated and to be afraid of in this safety culture. But I think the grassroots of bringing back that kind of calm, deliberate, rational thinking,
bit of breathing with it,
is coming. And we won't divert into what Jordan Peterson's up to, but people have been excited about what he's creating, this new project that he's launching. And I've listened to various talks and various speakers, and I listen to the way they speak, and they speak with realism around the problems that the world is facing, but all this kind of calm, rational view of let's bring back human values, let's bring back a sense of positivity. Let's start to think about what we can actually do without, trying to force everyone into central bank digital currencies and net zero programs that completely track your carbon footprint and, force you into rations. Let's bring it into a rational conversation where the sensible people take charge again. And if you, again, looking at economic cycles, here's where it's interesting. And again, I know we talked about Ray Dalio a few times. He talks about, like, during the good times, during periods of prosperity, people start to party.
Yeah.
They don't start to ponder.
Yeah.
They party. And actually, I do think what's happened is we've gone through a period of prosperity. The people who shaped that prosperity have lost their way. And now, as a result, a huge amount of space has been left for this new kind of way of thinking, which is very much victimhood and, fear and uncertainty, because the people who were the sensible people in the beginning took their finger off the boil, and it's let the crazies into the house to rule the roost. And it's like the matter every day, I think, how do we, no matter where I turn, I think none of the power structures, I don't respect many of the people in leadership positions because of the nature of the reality that we're creating. And it is time for the sensible people to take over. But the problem is now that the sensible conversations are starting to emerge, as we've talked about, like they're smack down, it's like there's no space for it in society. So we have to be willing to push through that. And
find space and make space for the grounding. I always say that, if I've got that space to share these perspectives and be curious, that's the grounding level that can make you feel empowered, that even if, even if it does get apocalyptic, that's all right. Because every morning, all you got to do is wake up and take the next step, whatever's happening.
Yes.
So it is this kind of this endless future of what's going to happen. Whatever happens, you've got to wake up and take the next step, and whether it's you view what's happening as an improvement or it's got worse, you still got to do that every day. So I kind of like to say, settle into that, know, and there's a kind of, it's almost like part of the kind of resistance to what's going on is almost, I understand it, is escaping life.
Yeah.
Well, we get very philosophical. There is no escaping life. We're here. So, part of it is like the will to, run away or avoid or run. Well, actually, can we sit with it and be with it? And there is nowhere to escape. And almost, coming back to freedom at the end of it, there are people who found the most profound freedom while they're incarcerated. Not because they got, off grid and they didn't have any Google phone. They found it in the most intense dystopian situation. So again, what will lead to your freedom? Who knows? It's going to be unique for everybody. But if we're on that path to improvement, and having these discussions down and sharing perspectives, I very much like that vision of we're all trying to help each other to stand in our own unique power.
Yes.
Because as you said, the kind of reaction that can come out from the state of saying this is the way, we know they're talking nonsense. It's not the way. But then somebody else saying, no, this is the way. Well, that's another version of a model. That's still imposition of going, this is the way. Now, I don't claim to know anyway. I'm finding my way, and I think you're finding your way, and everyone I meet is finding their way. But I want to be supportive of them finding their way.
Yes.
So we're all finding our way. And as you said, it's almost like everybody getting empowered. The natural result of that is institutions and things shifting. But of course, people maybe don't like that idea because maybe that is lifetimes away or generations away. But for me, that's all right because it's begun and it's happening.
Yeah, and that is a culture, for me, it's like, the only way is your way. That was literally the motto of my previous brand, Unstoppable Media. It's the only way is your way. It's about you finding your path.
Yeah.
And if we have a culture that represents that value of freedom, which is the freedom to follow your path, and if you go really into the libertarian path, which is do no harm to others, you follow your path as long as it doesn't infringe upon someone else's ability, as long as it doesn't affect someone else's ability to follow their own path, then explore away. But the layer beyond that, which is wonderful, because again, what's often falsely labeled as people who are freedom orientated is that they are described as deeply individualistic, and it's false, because your point around, in fact, the more I found my own way, the more I want to help others find their way.
Instantly, likewise.
Because it's so empowering when you know your path.
Yeah.
And that is, that is supportive of others, that is compassionate of others, that is, and it's the antithesis of what we started talking about, how, you know, when we get into that pluralistic, you know, or polarized, rather kind of this or that binary, and the puritanical form of perfection, that's not a supportive stance. Yeah. It's a judgmental stance, and to me, it's very powerful when we can step into that role of helping others to shine a light on their own path.
Yeah, and meet them where they're at.
Yes.
At any given time, because I have to remind myself, Dan, if I was feeling pretty empowered at the COVID during that time, and part of that's because of my own journey and having quite a lot of awareness about this stuff a long time in advance. So therefore, I wasn't in kind of shock during it, and I was kind of psychologically ready for it. But that's easy. That doesn't mean that somebody I met felt as confident, and nor should they. So rather than go, come on, you just do this. You don't wear a mask. You can be strong. They're on their own journey. And if this had happened to me at a time, maybe I could have been in a bit of a nervous wreck and not in a good place. So this kind of judgment of where you need to be in light of what's going on doesn't respect where people are coming from or what they got going on. And I understand definitely, there can be a frustration of, what we're doing in the movement to get freedom, whatever. But I look at this very realistic, not in a negative way. You haven't got, say you had a local group of a few hundred people, you haven't got a few hundred battle-ready warriors standing in their power. And I don't mean that in a judgmental way. I mean that just naturally. People have got so much on their plates. They've come from difficult, they're going through. So it's almost like they're being asked to maybe fight the system and the state. And they're just starting to sort their family out after what's happened in the last 3 years and navigate how they're going to, navigate in terms of their income or whatever. So I think I don't mean that some people feel very disappointed about maybe where things are going or how much, but I think that's just realistic to own where we're at. And yes. That's okay.
Yes.
And people, I support people, they're making improvements and they're on their path. And, I want to support that rather than, kind of berate, it's just not good enough. We're not doing enough. People are doing so much at their own level.
Yes. And the macro is a reflection of the micro often. It's that the perfectionism is one thing, but also the expectation that comes with, wanting it to be different tomorrow, and it can be different tomorrow, but it's micro steps. It's repeated action.
It's the resistance to what is, which brings a lot of suffering.
Yes.
I've got an amazing, I don't know if I'll save it for another time, but I had that thing, Dan, where it kind of was a shift into my, a pivotal moment in my life where I was really busy, running a bar, doing lots of stuff in the Alps. And my addiction was big mountain skiing. That was my kind of escape and what got me into the now. And I had a terrible accident where I won't go too graphic because it was gruesome. I literally snapped my leg, multiple pieces, lying in the snow with it kind of at an angle. So it was gruesome. But what was interesting, and I remember you saying in one of our early chats that, I've done a load of work on myself and looked over the years, but this was the first time that I think your phrase was, it was time to breathe that work out and live into it. And I've experienced it in a visceral way, Dan, because it's so relevant to resistance. It was an awful injury. Again, the pain was probably off the charts, but that wasn't what was scary. It was more the shock of what had happened. And it was really, as I lay there in the snow, my dear friend came and helped me, and he was amazing, and got my backpack off and laid me down. But I noticed very quickly the suffering was, oh my God, I want to go back in time. This can't have happened. And also in future, as in, and what this means, oh my God, I can't do that. I can't do that. So I was in past and future. I was in complete resistance, and that was what was making me suffer. And this may have all happened in a couple of minutes, but it felt like an instant where I literally went, if you just relax into what's happened and don't try and go back forward, just accept where you are and get interested about it, be curious, the suffering ended there. I mean, I literally experienced that. It was an awful situation. But what was causing the suffering was not the pain or the situation, was actually my resistance to it, my judgment of what this means. Whereas if I just came present, I go, this is where I am. And from that point on, of course, they were full of challenges of hospitals and surgeries and a long rehabilitation. But in that instance of getting out of resistance, I transformed and moved a lot of the suffering out of the way, and because I was like, this is where I'm at now. This is what I got to do. Everything's still interesting. Life's still, this is as interesting as it not happening. It's just different. So the resistance to where we are is where a lot of the suffering comes from.
Yes.
And I think transforming that and knowing here's where we are, this is always the best place to start from, where you're at right now. You've got no choice. You have to. You can always start from where you are. And that can really move you beyond suffering and into curiosity and growth.
Yes. And I also think, kind of a related point, once you start to future pace what the worst case scenario could be, whether it's an individual problem or like a financial problem or the societal issues, that apocalyptic state that you refer to, you're actually more likely than using that mindset you've just described just to be fully present with it and just be at ease.
Yeah.
Because, and actually the reality is who would you want to be taking action in the face of an apocalyptic scenario? The person who's freaking out and like losing it, or the person who's already been there in their mind and they've anticipated it and they're calm and they're ready.
Yeah.
Because when we operate from that state of mind, we can have clarity in the moment. We can have certainty. We can have direction. We can have flow. And we can have ease. And that's always available to us. Yeah. And it's like you've said, when you talk about crypto, you talk about building an investment thesis where you consider those possible realities. But by doing so, you've already mentally prepared for them.
Totally. There's no nasty surprises because it's like I've embraced all those into my thesis. So therefore, you're already there, Dan. I think that's huge. You're not then burning up all your energy in worry about future scenarios. Yeah. Which gets, and your point's so perfect because say somebody's spent 3 years worrying there's going to be a knock on the door from the army with a syringe, something that probably would never happen in my view. But you've burned yourself out that if it did come, you're so exhausted from that situation. You're not in a fit state. Whereas if you nurture yourself and go, okay, anything could happen, but I'm busy just looking after myself and nurturing and not in constant worry, then you're much going to be better to deal with whatever does happen. So, the worry, as we all know, is one of the biggest wastes of energy. I know it's hard to get out of that. I used to be a huge worrier, Dan. I've come from extreme anxiety kind of my background. And, it's so nice to go beyond that into just being present and going, well, because I always give an example, even if the best thing, your dream came true or what you think your dream, you still just got to wake up the next day and take your day on, and it will still be full of challenges. They might be different. Some of your challenges, you might think these are even worse at some way, So I suppose that's my thing of settling into the journey. And, that's why I like to say I view this journey on as much more you versus you, i.e. me versus me and you, than me against the elites or me against the state or me against, the Illuminati, whatever word you want to use. It's me against me, much more.
Yes.
Do I take the better action? Do I take right action? And do I improve? That's what's in my power. And that's where the real richness is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, again, coming into the kind of breadth of the conversation we've talked about, that's where we reclaim our sovereignty and that's where we find our power. And it might sound cliched or even esoteric, but our outer world is often a reflection of our inner world. Yeah. And it comes back to that point. If we identify our inner authoritarian, we go to work on ourselves and actually become role models for others. Yeah. That's how we then inspire others to find a new path or explore something, which, if we go full circle to what this conversation was about barriers to someone, it doesn't matter if we're talking about crypto or anything, barriers to actually embracing something new. Yeah. A lot of what we've talked about here is actually unraveling the philosophy and psychology of why some people are open to something and others aren't. And also underpinning that, having the congruence and the the sense of self-sovereignty, the sense of inner freedom, that no matter what anyone else is doing, you're following your path with respect to others on their path, doing so without judgment, and in a way that forges something where you become impenetrable to a degree. None of us are infallible, but we create a space where we can operate from that mindset, that philosophy. And it enables us to create our sovereign path. And we can then walk along that path with others on a similar path, or we can walk along the path with others on a different path. But it's...
You inspire by being that and walking it and exuding that energy naturally, much more, that can have a much more powerful effect than kind of chasing somebody with, kind of chasing after them with an idea or with your opinion or, being empowered is much more inspiring than telling somebody else they need to get empowered. You know?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
actually, and I experienced it, Dan, when I was at my sort of raw food cleansing kind of, I was vibrating at a different level. I just felt different. I wasn't talking to anybody, but I felt that people related to me differently because I was kind of, in a really, I don't know, cheesy, but, I was exuding a different energy because I was very clean, and people relate to me differently. So but that wasn't because I was going around saying anything or saying a message. It was what you exude by getting there. So, that's that point. If we all can increase that exuding, then things do shift around us, and we all raise each other up. We all get inspired by others, and you can inspire other people, and it's all that interplay, then, isn't it? Which
Yes,
is why,
it
like
is.
anything I do, it's when I give a talk, it's about us all bringing our value and perspectives, and to hopefully we can all help lift each other up in that process.
Absolutely. Sam, this has been a wonderful conversation. We opened up by looking at, what are the barriers. We started by examining, the barriers to entry into crypto, and we could easily have looked at that from a practical standpoint around the technology and the knowledge and the different things you need in place to get started. But actually, more fundamentally, it's about the barriers from going to 0 to 1, which is really what we've extracted today.
Yeah.
But in closing, we have put together some resources to help you go from 0 to 1. We talked about our workshop last night where we had people who are completely new to the topic, just getting their head around the initial concepts around crypto, blockchain, etc. You've got the people who are at the basics level. They've got some of the fundamentals, some of the tools, some of the systems you need. And then you've got the people who are in action, but taking action, but they're at the early stage. So we've developed a course called the Navigating Digital Assets course. We've had nearly 400 people take that course now, which helps you go from 0 to 1. It helps you understand the basics. And if you follow the checklist within the course, you'll get the basics in place. We've also got the Navigating the Financial Reset program, which we've talked about today, which is where we had the class last night. We meet twice a month, once a month, looking at the wider macroeconomic picture, but also looking at things like how you can, different strategies for protecting your assets, safeguarding your funds, different ways to actually accumulate wealth if you're in that phase of life. And then we have a specific crypto session like we did last night. So whether you're interested in crypto or not, I think the key message, Sam, from today's session is, we don't know what we don't know, and actually at least take ourselves to a place of knowing so we can do so from a place of discernment. And I'd like to think that, the course that you put together, the Navigating Digital Assets course, as a starting point, is a great way to get that fundamental knowledge through the lens of the wider picture. So it's not just you can go on Udemy or you can go on Google and buy, just read about crypto if you want, but you won't get that wider perspective.
It's the holistic angle, isn't it, Dan? Looking at it from all, I'm passionate about that, and it's what used to drive me mad when I was young because I had too many perspectives, but it's starting to pay off. I think it's starting to be helpful, and so it's interesting. It's something that was my bane of my life is I couldn't stop looking at millions of perspectives, but actually that is really helpful because it gives you a much broader picture and a holistic view. And you're absolutely right, it goes far beyond just you get the practicals, but you're adding that to the holistic, the good, bad, and ugly sides, positives, negatives, everything. So, and adding a lot of extra awareness to it. So it's it's a huge way of putting a lot of meat on the bones really quickly.
Yes, and I think it's important that you've referenced the good, the bad, and the ugly, because actually a lot of the criticism, a lot of the concerns or objections from within our community, within the kind of freedom communities or the weight communities, will largely come from the ugly part, the good, bad, and the ugly, and that is there. We're not suppressing that or hiding that. We're diving into it to see where things could go. As we've talked about, to understand what the parameters are. But we're also looking at the probabilities, and we're also looking at the alternatives, and we're also looking at what the opportunities are for us to take control. Not control as in control of others, but for us to take control of our own path. But also for us to tap into that creative power of building solutions. And we can only do that if we support each other, as we've talked about, rather than knock each other down. Result to aluminium attacks because this person is doing this or this person's talking about that without, I think we can move beyond that. We can move beyond that into a new space where we can actually start to imagine a brighter future. And with knowledge is only potential power. When we start to imply that knowledge, we get into a place of wisdom. And there is there is ancient wisdom we can draw upon,
Yeah.
philosophy, but there's also new wisdom that we're creating.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many, through learning about this technological shift, and again, the good, bad, and ugly sides of it, you're then much more clued up about what's coming. And, what is kind of, what are the building blocks of that are going to use all sorts of things? Because it's, again, that's useful for you navigating forward and thinking how you might position yourself or navigate. So, it is an interesting education about being ahead of the curve of what's happening, regardless across the whole spectrum. Yes. That's why it's so interesting, and that's why I think it's an interesting topic. It's much more than, it's like everything bleeds into everything else once you get these topics. They're all interlinked. So it's part of our education of what is going on, how can we navigate, how can we find our way through and be creative, and so there's so much richness in it beyond, I think, what a lot of people would expect when they're just thinking crypto.
Yes. Absolutely. So if you'd like to continue to explore with us, of course, we're here every Tuesday on the Uncharted Territory podcast. But if you're interested in finding more about the course we've just talked about or our monthly program, you can also go to weareelevate.org/reset, where you'll see the options that are available to you to continue your exploration with Sam and I. So, Sam, this has been a wonderful conversation, very deep, and philosophical at times, but really important to underscore, the way that we think and our ability to be open-minded can influence our ability to look at creating new opportunities for ourselves. And actually, it's that rich tapestry of perspectives. Yeah. I think that's, again, I understand where you're coming from. It's a blessing and it can be a curse at the same time. It's the yin and the yang. But when we harness those perspectives,
well, that's it. Yeah.
It's what that can give us. It's what it can bring to the world that really makes the difference. And
let's stay open and stay curious.
Stay open, stay curious. I like that. All right. Well, I'll say thank you very much to our listeners. Thank you to Sam. Another wonderful conversation. Please subscribe to the show. If you're watching us on YouTube and you'd rather listen on the podcast, we're on Apple, Spotify, all the major audio platforms. We've got the decentralized platforms coming, Odyssey, etc. Watch this space. But please do subscribe on your favorite platform, and we look forward to seeing you on our next discussion of the Uncharted Territory podcast.